Megaten franchise is no stranger to the strange, the shocking, the terrifying. For example, some people like to ship characters. Now that's what I call scary. Today, we are looking at one such ghoulish fright. And like all nightmare content, this one starts with fans. And not just any fans, but fans on the internet. This is the tale of Turn It Off Immediately, the Shin Megami Tensei Creepypasta. The origins of this creepypasta, as far as I can tell, starts on 2chan. For those unfamiliar, 2chan is the predecessor to 4chan, and it's an anonymous image board. This place birthed many memes. In the culture of 2chan, it's very common to try to scare people with unsettling stories, and Turn It Off Immediately was just another one of them. Sugu ni Kese comes from a 2003 post talking about scary or creepy glitches and things experienced in retro video games. Here's a translation courtesy of Atlas. Scary glitches in retro games. I think I read about this somewhere else on here in a Megaten thread, but I'll post it anyway because I think it's pretty fitting. One day someone was in the mood to play Shin Megami Tensei 1, so they went over to their SNES and flipped the switch to turn the power on. Now normally when the game boots up, after the Atlas logo appears on the screen, you're supposed to see the game's iconic magic circle, right? However, this time, nothing happened. The screen was just pitch black and stayed that way. Thinking it was strange, he decided to wait a bit and see what would happen. When he did, the words Sugu ni Kese, Sugu ni Kese, Sugu ni Kese, Sugu ni Kese flashed upon the screen. When I read it, I thought it was probably BS. But it's still pretty scary in its own right. This is pretty much the sum of what was told when people talk about this creepypasta, till this day. In another thread, someone claiming to be an Atlas staff said this. Well, this story definitely takes me back. Maybe it's finally time I shed a little light on this. You see, I'm the one who implemented that into the main game, and I conspired with another programmer to make it happen. At the time, it was pretty commonplace for games to have hidden stuff inside them. So without telling any of the main staff, I set out to put something in the game that would be befitting the Megami Tensei name. At first, I had the screen set to appear with a 1 in 256 chance, but that frequency was still a little too high for my liking, and I was worried that would lessen the impact. As a result, I ended up tuning it to a rate of 1 in 65,536 times. Even then, it still managed to get discovered in early copies of the game, resulting in it getting scrubbed out in later versions of the game. Still, it's a pretty nice memory I have from a different time after all is said and done. This added detail to the story and specificity, like the encounter rate and the reason why it happened. Learning it's not supernatural but actually a manufactured prank, and specifically it being something only on the first run of carts. And also you had to be very lucky or unlucky to experience it, with its rate being so crazy. Now that we had more detail, it's time to test if this was real and see if this crumbles under scrutiny. The person claiming to be an Atlas staff suggests that there are later versions of Shin Megami Tensei 1 released for the Super Famicom. But, in fact, there's only one print run of Shin Megami Tensei 1. And there is a second one, but it's a lot more obscure. It's this bizarre Nintendo Power product where games could be downloaded onto a special rewritable cartridge. It's often called the Lopi version, but it seems highly unlikely that this obscure thing would be where this fixed version of Shin Megami Tensei exists. And we could all ignore the re-releases of Shin Megami Tensei 1 as they are specifically referring to the Super Famicom edition. Another huge cause of doubt is whether or not the encounter rate was even technologically possible, and we had a few tech-savvy people discuss this on 2chan. The thing that's troubling me about this is the point about it being a random occurrence that takes place right after the SNES is turned on. Truth be told, I have my doubts as to whether such a thing would really be the case here. The thing about computers is that as long as the inputted controls remain the same, the output should essentially remain consistent. That's why it's possible to even do things like tool-assisted speedruns in the first place. Given that the random dice roll is said to take place during the initial booting phase of the game, it's reasonable to assume that the thing that would enable the random encounter generating seed to function properly and properly dole out different random numbers each and every time would be some sort of data with a battery backup attached to it. The data would then be called up and read, and a number generated accordingly. Here's the problem with that. Shin Megami Tensei does come with its own battery backup, but it's used for save game data, With just this on its own, unless the save game data is subsequently altered, it would be possible to end up with a case where Sugu Kese could keep relentlessly appearing without end every time the game is powered on. This could still be technically resolved by having the program change the seeding data in the background when the words show up on the screen, but that's an awful lot of trouble to go through from a development perspective. Basically, I don't think an RNG program that runs at startup is inherently impossible, but it certainly wouldn't be easy for a cartridge game like this. Another user says, one way of doing this with a battery backup would be to implement a timer and have the game constantly keeping track of how many seconds have passed since shutting down, and then when the game is booted up, use that number as the basis of generating a random number. It could also be accomplished by having a dedicated program run in the battery backup region that keeps counting a number up as its first task at a startup, and then only having the screen appear once every 65,536 times. If you put logic circuits into the cartridge for the express purpose of making it happen, there are multiple ways to make such a screen actually pop up. But likewise, I have my doubts about anyone at Atlas would go through such lengths. So to kind of summarize what these two people are saying is that the screen Sugu Kese is technically possible, but it would be a lot of work. This Atlas staff also says that they supposedly had a friend to help, and that just seems really interesting, a little dubious as well. And even though I initially said that this started with a 2003 post, I have some interesting news for you. There's actually an even older post dating back to 2002. The content of the post is basically the same. Someone is asking for scary game stories related to the old era, and this is what they say. There was this one time where my friend was playing Shin Megami Tensei 2, the SNES version. It was in the middle of the night, and when they turned it on, the Atlas logo didn't pop up. It was just a black screen. Just as my friend was starting to wonder if the cartridge wasn't properly making contact with the system, the words Sugu Kese, Sugu Kese, Sugu Kese appeared onto the screen in red text. Ever since then, my friend has never touched another Megami Tensei game. Oh no, it says something scary. Guess I won't play Strange Journey. I won't play Persona 5 because it says Sugu Kese. Oh no! 2002 Japanese people were built different. So we now know that the first ever mention of this online was from an SMT2 post. And then we got this post saying that it was from the SMT1 game. And then we got the Atlas staff saying the same thing, that it's from the SMT1 thing. But this SMT2 thing predates both. Now with all this being said, the whole thing became a confusing mess for a few years. People muttering about the existence of the Shin Megami Tensei 1 and 2, etc. until 2018, where a journalist for Buzz Plus News contacted former Atlas staff Kazunari Suzuki to talk about this rumor. He said he asked the programmer who worked on it and they denied it. It's very important to remember that old Atlas didn't have the 400 plus staff developing titles that Atlas currently has. For SMT2, there was 18 staff. For SMT1, there was 16 staff. For Megami Tensei, there was like 9 staff. Add to that the credits were largely kind of confusing and unimportant, as people would work together collaboratively, whether it would be the programmer contributing story ideas or the music person contributing design concepts. So someone like Cosmo Kaneko, who was instrumental to the story, lore, design, and game design of SMT1, it doesn't really matter that they were simply credited as just a designer. Anyway, Suzuki added that the sub-programmer also denied it, and that the staff culture behind SMT 1, 2, and before that was a very serious staff, and they wouldn't do this as a joke. Suzuki explained that this likely came from the Famicom version of Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. Apparently, Atlas hired an outsourced programmer, and this guy added the infamous Kabu-chan begins debugging glitch. This was something that would happen if you hold A, B, left, and down on the second controller while auto-battling the demon bug. According to Suzuki, this made Koji Okada furious. So furious that he embezzled money and then ended up in the Panama Papers. When he saw this inclusion by the programmer, he erased it from the subsequent releases. This was something I was curious about, since Kabu, or Cub-chan, was one of the staff. I tried to find credits for them. There's about 9 people that were confirmed: Kazutoshi Ueda for game design, Kazunari Suzuki for Demon Fusion and Conversations, Tatsuya Omachi for level design and scenario, Hiroyuki Kitazumi for character design, Minoru Isaki for demon design and manual illustration, Yoshinori Yamagishi for apprentice work, whatever that means, Hideyuki Yokoyama for game design, Tsukasa Masuko for music, and Masaki Imabe for public relations. I'm not well versed in Japanese, so I don't know if any of these names could be a pun, and that might be why they could be nicknamed Cub or Kabu-chan. And in looking into the lore, this is tough because it's old, and some of this stuff I found in CD liner notes for Megami Tensei. I found a single interview from Suzuki on GeoCities and some other weird sketchy sources, and to add even more insanity to the situation, Suzuki says that this probably isn't exactly a hoax, because according to him, before Megami Tensei 2 was released, the game did indeed have the infamous message, if left unattended while the game was running. But this was apparently removed before the release. So it's possible the supposed staff talking about it on 2chan might simply just be misremembering and embellishing. This would mean that there's some truth to it. And that's the story of the Shin Megami Tensei Creepypasta. Honestly, it seems to be a game of telephone gone wrong, with there potentially being a seed of truth to all of this, if Kazunari Suzuki is to be believed. Alice did in fact reference it as well, with the pre-release of Persona 4 Arena Ultimax giving a similar message, clearly referencing the urban legend. Hope you're having a spooky Spooktober. Thank you to my channel member FF12Kid, and goodbye, fellow Megatenists.